Drive down Highway 99 through California Central Valley today, and tell me what you smell. You don't smell orange blossoms, you don't smell the sweet scent of ripe strawberries ready for harvest. You smell death, you smell millions of dollars of food rotting on the vine, because there are no hands to pick it. Rows and rows of lettuce turning brown in the sun, tomatoes bursting open on their stems. Almonds falling to the ground, unharvested, worthless. This isn't a drought, this isn't a natural disaster, this is a man-made catastrophe. And it happened in 72 hours. I'm Dana Sterling, and this is Matter. News. What you're about to hear is not speculation, it's not political theater. These are the hard numbers that every major outlet is going to copy in the next 48 hours, but you're hearing it here first. Because this is the original source of the economic data that matters if you want the truth about what's happening to your food supply. And your wallet, hit that subscribe button right now, and I need you to do something else. Drop a comment right now and tell me what state you're watching from. Are you seeing food prices spike in your area already? Because what's happening in California this week is coming to your grocery store next week. Let me give you the number that should terrify every single person in this country: 75%. That's the no-show rate for agricultural workers in California's Central Valley this week. Not a typo, not an exaggeration. 75% of the workforce that feeds America did not show up to work. We're talking about Fresno County, Kern County, Tulare County, the agricultural engine of the United States. These counties produce more food than most countries on Earth. And this week, 3 out of every 4 workers stayed home. Now, the official story, the one you'll hear from Sacramento, is that this is about federal immigration enforcement. They'll tell you that rumors of ICE raids spooked workers. They'll say it's temporary. They'll say the situation is stabilizing. Let me show you why. That official narrative is a lie wrapped in a press release. The Central Valley produces 25% of the food consumed in the United States. 25%. That's not just California feeding California, that's California feeding New York, feeding Texas, feeding Florida. When the Central Valley sneezes, the entire nation catches pneumonia. Here's what actually happened on Monday of this week. Reports started circulating in farm worker communities that federal immigration authorities were planning coordinated enforcement actions across agricultural areas. Now, whether these reports were true or false is almost irrelevant at this point, because the fear became the reality. By Tuesday morning, farm labor contractors were calling growers with the same message: we can't staff your fields, the crews aren't coming. By Wednesday, the situation had gone from crisis to catastrophe. Strawberry fields in Watsonville that required daily harvesting were left untouched. Each day a strawberry stays on the plant past peak ripeness, it loses value after 3 days. It's worthless. Those fields represent $17 million in lost product, not over a season, in 1 week. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like on the ground, because the human cost here is staggering, and it's being completely ignored in the political finger pointing. Maria Gonzalez has been a crew supervisor for Driscoll's berry operations for 12 years. She manages a team of 48 pickers during peak season. This week, 9 people showed up, 9 out of 48. I want you to understand what that means in practical terms. A commercial strawberry field needs to be harvested every 72 hours. During peak production, you have a 3-day window. Miss that window, and the entire crop is destroyed. With 9 workers doing the job of 48, they couldn't even cover 20% of the acreage. Maria told us, and I'm quoting directly here, I watched 15 years of relationship building with these plants just die. We breed these varieties for specific harvest windows. When you miss the window, you don't just lose this week's crop, you lose the entire genetic investment. But it gets worse. Let's talk about the compounding effect. Remember our previous analysis of the Blue Diamond processing facility closure in Sacramento? That facility processed 62% of California's almond crop. It employed 840 workers. It shut down 2 weeks ago due to what the company called unforeseen operational challenges. Now we have the full picture of the nightmare scenario. Even if we could somehow magic up enough workers to harvest the almond crop, where would we send it? The processing facility is closed, so we have almonds falling off trees with nobody to pick them. And even if someone did pick them, there's nowhere to process them. This isn't just a labor shortage, this is a complete supply chain decapitation. Let me give you the numbers on almonds specifically, because California produces 80% of the world's almonds. 80%, not just American almonds, the world's almonds. The current crop ready for harvest represents $1.3 billion in farmgate value. That's what farmers should receive. But here's the economic death spiral: with only 25% of normal labor available and zero processing capacity in The main facility industry analysts are projecting that 60 to 70% of this crop will be lost. Let me translate that into dollars. We're looking at somewhere between $750 million and $900 million in agricultural product that will simply rot or be plowed under. That's not money that just disappears. That's farmer bankruptcies. That's rural bank failures. That's entire towns in the Central Valley facing economic collapse. And before anyone says, well, farmers can just pay more to attract workers, let me explain why that analysis is completely disconnected from reality. First, the issue isn't wages. The average agricultural worker in California's Central Valley makes between $16 and $22 an hour, depending on piece rate productivity. That's above California's minimum wage. The issue is fear. You cannot pay someone enough money to overcome the fear of being separated from their children and deported. That's not an economic calculation, that's a human survival instinct. Second, even if you could instantly raise wages by 50%, you still have the processing bottleneck. There is no amount of money that reopens a closed factory overnight. Let's talk about what this means for food prices, because this is where it hits your family directly. California produces over 400 different commodities. The state grows 90% of America's strawberries, 95% of processed tomatoes, 99% of artichokes, 99% of walnuts. When production drops by 60 to 70% on these crops, prices don't just increase proportionally, they spike exponentially because of scarcity economics. When supply drops below a certain threshold, prices don't follow a linear curve, they follow an exponential curve. We're already seeing it in forward commodity markets. Strawberry futures are up 38% week over week. Almond futures are up 42%. These aren't retail prices yet, these are wholesale prices. By the time this works through the distribution chain to your local grocery store, we're looking at consumer price increases of anywhere from 60 to 100% on California grown produce. Think about what you paid for strawberries last week. If you paid $4 for a pound, you're about to pay somewhere between $6.50 and $8. Think that's bad? Wait until the secondary effects kick in, because California doesn't just grow food, California grows the food that other food depends on. Let me explain what I mean. California produces 91% of the grapes in the United States. Those grapes become wine, become juice, become raisins. California produces 74% of the lettuce. That lettuce goes into every salad, every burger, every sandwich at every restaurant chain. In America, when lettuce production drops by 70%, Chipotle doesn't just pay more for lettuce, Chipotle pays more for lettuce, raises menu prices, sees customer traffic drop, and starts closing locations. We're not talking about food inflation, we're talking about cascading economic failure across the entire food service industry. Have you noticed this in your neighborhood? Yet go to your local grocery store tonight, look at the produce section. I want you to pay attention to two things: empty shelves and origin labels. You're gonna start seeing more gaps where California produce used to be, and you're gonna start seeing more produce from Mexico, from Chile, from New Zealand, all at significantly higher prices, because they know American supply has collapsed. This is what happens when the breadbasket goes empty. The whole world smells the opportunity to raise prices. Now let's talk about Governor Newsom's role in this catastrophe, because the political responsibility here is crystal clear. California declared itself a sanctuary state. The promise was simple: we will protect immigrant communities from federal immigration enforcement. We will create a safe environment where people can work without fear. That was the promise. Here's the reality. By creating a direct confrontation with federal immigration authorities, California's government created exactly the environment of fear and uncertainty that has now paralyzed the agricultural workforce. Workers don't know if the state can actually protect them. They don't know if federal authorities will override state policies, so they made the rational choice. Stay home, stay safe, stay with your family. The governor's office released a statement 3 days ago saying they are monitoring the situation and working with agricultural stakeholders to ensure continuity of operations. Let me translate that from political speak to English. They have no plan. Monitoring the situation means watching crops rot. Working with stakeholders means holding conference calls while strawberries turn to mush. This is what happens when political symbolism runs headfirst into economic reality. You can declare yourself a sanctuary, you cannot declare yourself exempt from the laws of supply and demand. But here's what makes me genuinely angry, and I want you to understand why this goes beyond politics into basic competence. This was predictable, not just predictable. Predicted. In November of last year, the California Farm Bureau submitted a report to the governor's office warning that any escalation in federal immigration enforcement rhetoric would likely trigger Exactly this kind of labor shortage, they modeled the scenarios. They showed that even a 20% reduction in available workforce would create significant crop losses. A 75% reduction was considered the catastrophic scenario that would require immediate emergency intervention. That report was submitted 94 days ago, 94 days. And what was the state's emergency preparedness plan? Nothing. There was no contingency planning, there was no emergency labor mobilization protocol, there was no coordination with processors to maintain capacity. During a crisis, let me give you a comparison point so you understand how badly California fumbled this. When Florida faces hurricane threats to citrus crops, the state activates emergency harvest protocols within 48 hours. They mobilize National Guard units to assist with picking. They fast-track temporary worker permits. They coordinate with processors to run 24-hour operations. Florida treats agricultural emergencies like actual emergencies. California treated a predicted crisis like an unexpected surprise. And now we're paying the price. The human stories coming out of the Central Valley this week are absolutely heartbreaking, and they're being completely ignored in the political narrative. I spoke with Robert Chen, a third-generation farmer in Fresno County. His family has been growing peaches for 73 years. This week, he made the decision to plow under his entire crop, 28 acres of peaches that were 4 days from optimal harvest. He couldn't get workers, he couldn't get them picked, he couldn't get them to market, so he destroyed them. When I asked him what that felt like, he said it felt like killing something I'd raised from birth. Those trees are 15 years old. We prune them, we water them, we protect them from frost, and then you just drive a tractor through and knock all the fruit to the ground. It's not farming, it's a funeral. Robert told me his operation lost approximately $380,000 this week. His insurance doesn't cover labor shortages. His banknote is due in 45 days. He's 72 years old. He told me, I don't think I'm gonna plant next year. Why would I? This can happen again anytime. You can't build a business on that kind of uncertainty now. Multiply Robert's story by 10,000 farms across the Central Valley, and you start to understand the economic devastation we're looking at. Let's talk about the ripple effects beyond California, because this is a national crisis, not a regional one. California agriculture supports 2.7 million jobs nationwide, not just the people picking strawberries, the truckers hauling produce to distribution centers in Nevada, the warehouse workers in Arizona packing shipments, the grocery store workers in Michigan stocking shelves. When California agricultural production drops by 60%, you don't just lose farm jobs. In California, you lose logistics jobs, processing jobs, retail jobs across the entire country. The economic modeling from UC Davis estimates that this week's crisis, if it extends for 30 days, will result in approximately 47,000 job losses nationwide, not seasonal fluctuation, permanent job losses, as farms shut down, processors close permanently, and distribution networks consolidate around fewer sources. And let's talk about national security for a moment, because food security is national security. The United States currently imports about 15% of its food supply. That number has been slowly increasing over the past 2 decades as American agriculture has faced pressure from cheaper foreign production. When California production collapses, that import percentage is going to spike dramatically. We're going to become more dependent on foreign food sources. Think about what that means strategically. Mexico already supplies significant amounts of produce to the U.S. market. When they see American production collapse, do you think they're going to keep prices stable out of goodwill? Or do you think they're gonna maximize profit from a desperate buyer? We're about to find out what happens when the country that feeds the world suddenly can't feed itself. Let me address the argument I know some people are already making in their heads. This is really about illegal immigration, and we need to enforce our laws. Fine, let's accept that premise for the sake of argument. Even if you believe that every single undocumented worker in California should be deported tomorrow, you still have to answer the question: what's your plan for the crops? Do you have 1 million American citizens ready to work in strawberry fields starting Monday morning? Cause I can tell you right now the answer is no. Agricultural work is brutal, it's physically demanding, it requires skills that take years to develop. You can't just pull someone from an office job and say go pick almonds. Doesn't work that way. So even if your end goal is complete immigration enforcement, you still need a transition plan. You still need to actually feed people while you're implementing your policy, and right now there is no plan, there's just crops rotting and families going hungry. Here's the data point that should terrify every economist in the country: food inflation is already running at 8.2% year over year. Nationally, that's before this crisis. That's the baseline when you add a 60 to 70% production drop in California produce on top of an already inflationary environment. You're not looking at 8% inflation, anymore you're looking at 2025. Potentially 30% inflation on fresh produce categories. Let me put that in household budget terms, the average American family spends approximately $900 per month on groceries if produce prices spike by 25% and produce represents 30% of grocery spending. That's an additional $67.50 per month. That's $810 per year. That might not sound like much to a wealthy family, but for a family living paycheck to paycheck, that's catastrophic. That's choosing between food and medicine. That's choosing between food and rent. And let's talk about nutritional impact because this goes beyond economics into public health. Fresh fruits and vegetables are already the most expensive category in the grocery store per calorie. They're also the first thing families cut when budgets get tight. When strawberries go from $4 a pound to $8 a pound, families don't just buy fewer strawberries, they stop buying strawberries entirely. They switch to cheaper, more calorie dense, less nutritious options. We're gonna see an immediate spike in consumption of processed foods, sugary snacks, and cheap carbohydrates. The public health consequences of this are going to show up in obesity rates, diabetes rates, and cardiovascular disease rates. 5 and 10 years from now, you're literally watching the creation of a public health crisis in real time. I want to bring this back to the central question: how did we get here? And the answer is a complete failure of governance at multiple levels. Federal immigration policy created uncertainty, state sanctuary policies created a false sense of security, and nobody at any level of government had the basic competence to plan for the predictable consequences. This isn't a Republican failure or a Democrat failure. This is a failure of the entire political class to do the basic job of governance, which is to anticipate problems and solve them before they become catastrophes. Let me tell you what should have happened 3 months ago when the Farm Bureau submitted their warning. The governor's office should have immediately convened an emergency task force with representatives from agriculture, labor, immigration, advocacy groups, and federal agencies. They should have war game scenarios. They should have created contingency plans. They should have established communication protocols to prevent panic. They should have coordinated with processors to ensure capacity could flex during crisis. None of that happened. Instead, we got press releases and political posturing. And now we have food rotting in fields. The comparison to COVID supply chain disruptions is instructive. Here, remember the toilet paper shortages, remember empty shelves in grocery stores. That was caused by a genuine black swan event, a global pandemic that nobody could have predicted. And even then, supply chains adapted within a few months. This crisis is different. This was entirely predictable. This was warned about in writing. And the adaptation isn't happening because the underlying cause, the fear in immigrant communities, isn't going away. You can't just restart a supply chain when the workers are too afraid to show up. Let me share one more story, because I think it captures the insanity of this situation. There's a farm in Kern County that grows table grapes there, one of the largest employers in the region. This week, they made a decision that shows you how desperate things have gotten. They offered to bus workers from Lowe's Angels provide housing on the farm property and pay double the normal wage rate. They advertised this in Spanish language media. They got 17 applicants, 17 people willing to work for double wages with transportation and housing, provided. They needed 240 workers. Even when you throw money at this problem, it doesn't solve the fear issue. People are not making economic calculations right now, they're making survival calculations. And here's the thing that makes me absolutely furious: this is gonna get worse before it gets better, because once farms start going bankrupt, once processing facilities close permanently, once distribution networks reorganize around non-California sources, you can't just snap your fingers and bring that back. It takes years to replant orchards. It takes millions of dollars to rebuild processing capacity. It takes decades to rebuild trust in agricultural communities. We're not looking at a bad quarter, we're looking at a generation-long reshaping of American agriculture, and it's happening because politicians on both sides decided that scoring points was more important than feeding people. What can you do about this? First, understand that your grocery bill is about to spike significantly. Budget accordingly. Stock up on non-perishable items now, while prices are still relatively stable. Second, diversify your food sources. Look for local farmers markets. Look for community-supported agriculture programs. Build relationships with local growers in your area. Third, and this is critical, put pressure on your elected officials at every level to actually solve this problem instead of just talking about it. We need emergency agricultural labor programs. We need coordination between state and federal authorities. We need processors too. Stay open, we need real solutions, not press conferences. The final thing I want to say is this: what's happening in California this week is a preview of what happens when political ideology runs into physical reality. You can have all the political debates you want about immigration policy, but at the end of the day, food has to be grown, harvested, processed, and distributed. That requires workers, that requires infrastructure, that requires competent governance, and right now, we have none of those things. We have crops rotting in fields, we have workers too afraid to work, we have politicians blaming each other, and we have families who are about to pay drastically more for food, assuming they can find it at all. This is Dana Sterling, and this is Madam News. If you want to stay ahead of the economic catastrophes that politicians don't want you to see, subscribe right now, share this video with everyone you know, because mainstream media is going to soft pedal this story. They're gonna say it's temporary, they're gonna say it's stabilizing, and they're gonna be wrong. The numbers don't lie, the fields don't lie, and neither do I. I'll see you in the next report, assuming we still have food to eat.